I never wanted to force people to come to this one place where I'm advertising, hey, we have trauma-sensitive yoga, so you come to me. You spend that hour and a half in Bay Area traffic and come to me. That's not going to work. It's never going to work if you're trying to really help these populations. So you have to go and find where they are and offer it to them.
Welcome to Beyond Theory, a podcast powered by Meadows Behavioral Healthcare that brings you in-depth conversations with firsthand insights from the people on the front lines of mental health and addiction recovery. I'm David Condos, and today I'm joined by yoga teacher Aditi Desai. She sits down with me to shine a light on yoga's ability to heal us, not just physically, but also psychologically. And she shares the practical steps that she takes to offer yoga to vulnerable populations in a trauma-sensitive way. So let's get out of the abstract and see how this applies in the real world. It's time to go beyond theory.
Hi, my name is Aditi Desai. I'm a trauma-sensitive yoga instructor for the Meadows Outpatient Program.
Awesome. Well, Aditi, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start by just kind of introducing you as a person. So your story, your journey to doing the work you do, caring about this work.
Okay, cool. I guess it started, so I served in Peace Corps back in 2011, and my journey to yoga kind of started before then. I was kind of practicing on and off. Being a first generation Indian American, I kind of have this interesting relationship with yoga as it's part of my culture, my heritage, but it wasn't something that I necessarily practiced all the time. So I practiced it on and off. And then when I was in Peace Corps, you get bored a lot in Peace Corps, and there's a lot of emotional.
Where were you?
I was in Uganda.
Okay.
East Africa. Yeah.
So go on.
So you have a lot of downtime, and there's a lot of emotional ups and downs. It's basically, it's a emotional roller coaster in that two and a change years. So it's kind of. What I found was that really helped me was yoga. I would wake up and have the intention of doing a short yoga flow, and that really kind of helped ease that roller coaster of emotion. When I was feeling really down or upset, I would turn to my yoga, I would turn to my meditation, and it really kind of brought me back to my purpose of why I decided to do Peace Corps, why I wanted to serve that community, why I wanted to go overseas and serve others.
And so you felt the benefits.
Yeah, I personally felt the benefits of not just physically, yes, yoga is have this great physical piece that can get you into shape and get you physically healthy, but I felt so many mental health benefits and things that I never knew that I was feeling, like anxiety and even slight depression. I kind of felt so much better, so much more at ease. Because to me, during that time, especially, yoga really taught me that I was enough. What I was doing was enough. I didn't have to push myself to be some savior volunteer, saving all the children in Uganda, right? I didn't have to be that person. That's a lot of
pressure if that's how you approach it.
It's a lot of pressure, yeah. And so that's what yoga kind of gave me.
Right. And so up until that point, you had just been enjoying yoga in your own life.
Selfishly, yoga's amazing.
Yeah. And so when you made that shift and you started teaching it, was the response just overwhelmingly positive right away?
Yes.
What did you see?
Yes, it was absolutely amazing how open everybody was to it, and how much they felt the benefits almost instantaneously. So I started working individually with people in individual therapy. So we had a behavioral health program. And so I'd work with clients individually, and it was just positive feedback after positive feedback. And once we started promoting this service to clients, I couldn't fill up my schedule. I couldn't open my schedule fast enough, right? It was just really interesting how it's almost I gave people something they never knew they wanted. And once they realized that they wanted it, they couldn't get enough of it. After about 2.5 years, it got to a point where I was like, I have to take this leap of faith because this is something. Like, this is something real. This is something helpful. This is something that will serve a community in a way that will fulfill like my passion and like my drive to want to do something that I wake up and I'm not like miserable. And at the same time, it's not going to be something where I have to sacrifice financially too much, right? Like, because I think that's a big thing for a lot of folks who are trying to follow their passion is like, what's the financial cost, especially in California, like
right where the cost of living is so high.
Yeah. And so that's, I mean, and I think that's why it took me so long to take that leap was like, okay, financially, how is this going to work out? And as cheesy as it sounds, as soon as I put that intention out there of like, this is what I want to do, this is what I feel like I'm meant to be doing, all these opportunities opened up to me. Like, it was the craziest thing. Like, I just kept getting linked to facilities, linked to organizations. Like, that's how I came to Meadows, was on Facebook. Someone said, hey, there's this facility that needs a trauma-informed yoga teacher. And I interviewed, and it was just like, it was like the universe was telling me like, yes, this is, you finally figured out what your purpose is. So here, go.
And there's such a great need. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so before we dive in deeper on the work you're doing here at the Meadows, I want to circle back to the vulnerable populations part of this discussion, because you said like you came from a public health background, right? Mm-hmm. And so you had this passion, kind of even back to your Peace Corps days, you had this passion of like doing something for the greater good. Yeah. And I think that's really cool how that ties in, and kind of that angle of trying to reach these vulnerable populations. So start by just kind of describing like what that means to you, the vulnerable population.
Yeah. So to me, vulnerable populations, I will say like specifically within yoga, is people who don't have the financial or physical access to get yoga in a studio. So there are so many barriers, like whether you live in a low socioeconomic area or you know, live in the suburbs and the yoga studios maybe in town, like, and you don't have access. Transportation. Yeah. So that physical access. And then there's the financial piece. Yoga studios are expensive, like not just in California, everywhere. Right. They're so expensive. And so I really wanted to reach populations who deserved to get the same benefits. Like, to me, everybody deserves to be able to try everything they can, but not have to worry about how am I going to pay for this $20 class? How am I going to pay for this membership? And to me, like and then, you know, further defining just general vulnerable populations, you know, they're folks who have some kind of need, right? Some kind of support need. So it's, you know, for me, it's like people living with HIV, people, incarcerated youth I work with, people in addiction recovery. I mean, that's obviously not all the populations that could be deemed vulnerable, but to me, those are kind of the populations that kind of reach out to me to where yoga can really make a huge difference.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so as you are kind of identifying these populations and you believe in it yourself, you've experienced benefits yourself, you want everybody to get that. Well, what have been the steps that you've taken to reach those populations and get it out there? Yeah,
it can be super difficult because, like, I mean, where do you find folks, right? Where do you find these communities? Yeah. But to me, what I basically did was I tried to reach out to places that I had the instinct that they would reach out to for services that they need, support that they need, right? So when you're talking about people living with HIV, where do they go? They go to hospitals, they go to their doctor's offices, they go to, you know, small healthcare centers. So, and, you know, incarcerated youth, you reach out to jails. People in recovery, you know, reach out to recovery centers. So that's what I did, is I basically went online, looked in the areas that I was willing to travel to and say, okay, what what are all these facilities that I can reach out to and promote this service.
And kind of meet those people where they already are.
Exactly. And that's a huge tenet in my personal yoga practice and yoga teaching, but also in kind of the greater like trauma sensitive or trauma informed yoga practice is meeting people where they're at, right? So I never wanted to force people to come to this one place where I'm advertising, hey, we have trauma informed yoga. We have trauma sensitive yoga. So you come to me. You spend that hour and a half in Bay Area traffic and come to me, right? No, that's not going to work. It's never going to work if you're trying to really, really help these populations. So you have to go and find where they are and offer it to them. And they may be resistant.
That's kind of the next thing I was going to ask you. Like once you're physically reaching them, like how do you reach them and get them to kind of buy in on this idea?
It's a lot of it is finding the staff at those facilities. So getting them interested. Kind of a lot of these facilities are very research oriented. So I try and find research. I try and find testimonials. I give them my own story too, like of how it helped me. And I will say, though, in California, it's been a lot easier, I think.
People are more open?
Yeah, people are much more open to almost experimenting. Like, I feel like in Florida, it was a lot of, like, I really had to show, like, quantitatively, like, these are the improvement scales that yoga has produced. But in California, it's like, I think here we kind of get that it's more than numbers. It's more than what you can find in a research paper. It's like there's that intuitive, like, yes, this is a healing, like existential greater thing that you can't put on paper necessarily. And I think what's helped a lot of, like, almost convince a lot of people is my own story of like talking about how, you know, emotionally it's helped me, how it's kind of given me more of a positive outlook on life. And with people working in addiction, I think there's always that up and down of like whether they're detoxing, whether
what they're going through.
Yeah, exactly. So that I think it's more that than their actual resistance to yoga. And it's very similar with behavioral health. Like when I'm working with folks, and even, you know, back at my previous job, while there was overwhelmingly positive reflection and support for the program, individually, like the patients wanted it, and then, you know, some days they didn't. Like it would be the same patient I would see one week and they'd be really into it, and the next week they'd be like, can we just lay down and like meditate the whole time and I don't want to move. So I think understanding that, and that's where my public health background really helps me, is that understanding how all these kind of health needs or life needs, I guess I could put it, affect mood and reactions. And, you know, knowing that I can't take it personally if someone doesn't want to come to yoga class, because it's not me, it's what's going on with them.
You have to kind of roll with what they're going through and respond to that. Yeah. So you mentioned the term trauma-informed yoga a couple times. Could you kind of dive into that a little bit, describe what that is and how it may be different than what someone has experienced at their local studio somewhere?
Sure. It's much more about the client. It's much more focused on the client's needs and wants and kind of meeting them where they're at. So some basic kind of tenets of trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive yoga is making everything optional and invitational. So the language that I use as I guide the clients through a series of poses or breath work is all invitational. So it's kind of like, if you're ready to, we'll move on to this. If you want to, let's try this. Whenever you're willing, shift to this, that kind of language.
Because yoga can be a little intimidating.
Yes.
So as someone who has done yoga but is not like super good at it, like it's great to be like, okay, if I can't do that, it's good to just stay where I'm at for a minute. So I like that.
And I mean, you take that in contrast to and this is super generalization, but to a yoga studio where they be like, okay, now forward fold. Okay, now bring your hands to the mat.
It's more of like, this is the program.
Yeah, it's a very different language from being invitational to being guided. That's the right word. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other tenets of trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive yoga is like, so there's like a specific orientation of the room, a specific like planning of the room. So I make sure everybody's in a circle. So we're all on kind of the same plane. No, there's no like
front and back.
Yeah, there's no one in front, no one in back. And there's also not that sense of like, I'm the teacher, you must do what I say. It's more of like, we're in this together. So let's do this together if you want to. And I also orient everyone so that all the clients are closer to the door. So within the circle, I'm kind of at the back wall. And they have basically easiest access to the door if they need to, if something comes up and they're like, no, I need to leave, right? You don't ever want to block anyone's exit, especially if they have a history of trauma.
Yeah.
And then one of the biggest pieces is hands off. So in a traditional yoga class, you may have experienced a teacher just coming up to you and saying, I'm going to adjust your shoulders. And they put their hands on your shoulders, then they bring them down. Some teachers won't even warn you that they're going to do that, right? They'll just come behind you.
Touch,
yeah, and they'll touch your shoulders and adjust you, which may be fine. But to me, it seems very intrusive and just a lot of assumptions going on there. Like, I don't know what's going on with you and you don't know what's going on with me. So who's to say that you can just adjust me? Like, I might have a shoulder injury. I might be going through trauma right now. Like, you don't know, right? No one knows. And so for me, keeping everything hands off. So whenever I offer an adjustment, it's all through verbal, or I show it on my own body. So like, say someone, and it's all for injury prevention, right? So I would never adjust someone because they're aligned wrong. I would only say, oh, can you move your foot forward so that you don't hurt your ankle in the long term, right? It just makes sense. Like, what? In any place, like, what makes it okay for you to just touch someone without them consenting to it, right? And I've translated all these tenets into my yoga studio practice too. Because for me, I truly believe that all yoga should be trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed yoga. Because even when you're working with someone who can pay $20 to come to a yoga studio, that doesn't mean that they've never been through trauma. That doesn't mean that they are not also, going through recovery, that they may not have a chronic illness or an injury. So it's not fair for me to assume that just because you can come to my studio, that means that
you don't have any of those problems.
Have anything else going on, right? Yeah. Like, so that's like, I think one of my biggest things I'm like in my grand plan of life is like to try and really work with the yoga studios and yoga teacher trainings and say, hey, this is a big deal. Like, this is a thing that needs to be incorporated in all classes, whether it's a power yoga class or a gentle restorative yoga class.
Yeah. And so zooming into the work that you do here at the Meadows Outpatient Center in Silicon Valley, how do you describe kind of the relationship that yoga can have with this recovery journey, specifically looking at like substance use recovery, mental health recovery? What does yoga bring into that?
So so the stereotype, I guess, of like addiction recovery or behavioral health recovery or treatment is very much talking. I know things are changing and it's slowly changing. And I still think that there's this huge idea that if we talk about our problems, we can ease those problems away. And what I feel like is starting to come out right now is that as we talk about our problems, you feel things physically in your body, right? Like, think about the last time you were feeling anxious. Think about the last time you were feeling frustrated. It's not just in your head. It's everywhere.
Because the mind and body are so connected.
Exactly. Yeah. So what yoga brings to these programs, especially here at the Meadows, is that physical relief, that physical tension release, right? So as we're going through detox, as we're, talking about our feelings or trauma history, all those feelings come up, and there's always going to be a physical reaction to that, a physical manifestation of those feelings. So yoga helps process all those feelings in a physical way. It's almost like back, I don't even know if they still say this, but back in the day when they'd say, oh, if you're angry, punch a pillow or go to kickboxing, right? It's a very similar concept, but it's less aggressive.
Right. Yeah. But it still helps your body release. Yeah. And so looking at a bigger picture sense, for the general public, what might be one thing that you wish they understood better about yoga specifically, and kind of the role that it can play, the benefits it can have?
So I think what I just honestly wish that the general population understood the deeper or the depth of yoga, right? Like, I think the general population has this idea of the physical benefits of yoga. And I wish that there was this drive to open the collective mind to say, this isn't just a physical practice, because yoga isn't. It's breathing, it's meditation, and it's the physical asana practice. So I think our culture, our society has gotten stuck on that physical part, because when you have a physical change, it's like that quantitative piece of research, right? Like, if you feel a physical change, then you know something's working. But when you emotionally and spiritually, you may not feel that direct change right away. And so I think that the other aspects of yoga get lost. So I think if we could open our collective mind and say, let's give it a chance to work on all these other levels, not just physically.
Yeah. Kind of beyond just being a stretching exercise.
Exactly.
Kind of unlocking what else it can offer. Yeah. And so for people who might be interested in learning more about this, diving into this a little bit deeper, what would be like a book or a resource that you might recommend for them?
So there are a few out there specifically related to trauma-sensitive, trauma-informed yoga. And I've noticed that a lot of these resources can be very specific to different populations. So there's one website, and they have training materials, informational materials. It's called Yoga of 12-Step Recovery. It's a great resource, especially...
You said that's a training that you did.
Yes, I did that training. And the founder of that training, Nikki Myers, is amazing. Similar to me, she kind of used yoga to help her through her recovery path and realized that, hey, this is a thing, so we're going to make it a thing. So that's a great resource. There's also Purple Dot Yoga Project. They do trauma-informed yoga with individuals who are surviving domestic violence. And then there's the Art of Yoga Project, which is based here in Palo Alto. And their training is specifically centered around incarcerated youth. So I would say, like, those three programs can provide a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of information. I mean, even if you just go online and check out, you just Google trauma-sensitive or trauma-informed yoga, there's a wealth of information right now. And I think the more we can learn, the more we can experience, the better with this.
Yeah. All right. Well, last thing to wrap up. What might be one piece of advice, or something that you've received yourself, or something that you find yourself passing on to others?
I think the greatest piece of advice that I've been given, or the greatest kind of guidance I've been given, is to honor where I'm at. So that's what I kind of emphasize in not only my yoga classes, but everything I do, whether it's my personal relationships, whether, I'm just talking on a podcast. I think honoring where you're at is the most important thing you can do for yourself, because if you try to push yourself in one way or another, you're going to have that misalignment. You're not going to be happy. So, to find true joy, to find true happiness, you have to honor where you're at, even if that means you're sitting in those negative feelings, right?
Aditi Desai is a registered yoga teacher who specializes in bringing yoga to vulnerable populations, including those in recovery from addiction and mental health issues. To find out more about the Meadows Outpatient Center in Silicon Valley, California, where she serves as a group yoga instructor, visit their website at meadowsiopsv.com. To check out more episodes of this podcast and find all kinds of other resources and tools from Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, visit beyondtheorypodcast.com. Finally, thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Beyond Theory.